Hola, buenas. Hello, teacher. I continue on the chapter 2 of the book, The Stick Jobs. Yeah.
Chapter 2 The Birth of Apple. Paul and Clara. Chapter 2 The Birth of Apple. Paul and Clara Jobs had promised Steve's birth mother that they would send him to university. And in 1972, that time had come. There were some great choices locally, like Stanford and Berkeley. Steve told his parents, however, that only one university was right for him, Reed College in Oregon. It was an arts university and was one of the most expensive places to study in the country. His parents didn't have a lot of money, but they finally agreed to send him there.
Paul and Clara Jobs and promised Steve your mother that they would send him to university, and 162 that time had come. There were some great choices locally like Stanford or Berkeley. Steve told his parents, however, on the only the university was right for him. Red College is orange. It was art university and was one of the most expensive places to study in the country. His parents did have a lot of money, but they finally agreed
At Reed,
him there.
Steve learned little in class. Instead, he and his new friend, Daniel Kotka, became interested in Zen Buddhism. Steve stopped wearing shoes and stopped eating meat. Sometimes he ate nothing at all for a week, and at other times lived on only fruit and green vegetables. He continued to be a vegetarian for the rest of his life.
Alright, Steve Lemmer learned little in class. Stan, he and new friends, Daniel Cott, become interested in seeing buttons. Steve stopping wearing shoes and starting eating meat. Sometimes he ate nothing at all for a week, and all other times living on the only fruit and green vegetables. He continued to be vegetarian for the rest of his life.
After a term, Steve decided to stop his studies. He didn't think they were worth the money that his parents were paying. He didn't want to leave Reed, however. He stayed there with Daniel and his other friends and went to a few classes that interested him. He went to dance classes to meet girls, and he also went to a class where he was taught different styles of handwriting. Later, this class was the reason Steve introduced a choice of writing styles on Apple computers. Computers hadn't offered a choice before.
After a time, Steve decided to stop his studies. He didn't think they were worth the money that his parents were paying. He did want to leave the read. However, he stayed there with Daniel and his other friends and went to the fifth clubs that interested him. They all went to the club, the green meet girls, and he also went to the class. There was from different styles on reading. Later, this class and the reason Steve introduced that choice written styles on Apple computers. Computers did had offered a choice before.
In 1974, Steve moved back to his parents' house and started looking for a job. Atari was a young company in Silicon Valley that 2 years before had produced the world's first successful computer game, a very simple black and white form of computer tennis called Pong. One day, Al Alcorn, the boss of Atari, was told, "There's a guy here who won't leave until we employ him." Alcorn agreed to meet him, an 18-year-old Steve Jobs with old clothes, no shoes, and a bad smell. But he liked Steve's excitement about technology and offered him a job.
In 1964, Steve moved back to the parents' house and started looking for a job. Story was a young company in Silicon Valley that 2 years before produced the world's first successful computer games. A very simple black and white for a computer tennis called Pong. One day, Alcom, the boss of Atari, was told there's a guy here we will want to live until they employ him. I can already meet him, an 18 years old Steve Jobs with old clothes, the shoes and a bad smell, but he liked Steve. It's excitement about technology and offered him a job.
Steve usually worked at night in the Atari office. His manager didn't want him to be there during the day because he smelled so bad. Steve made some useful changes to the games that he worked on, but he was soon looking for a new adventure.
Steve usually worked at night on the Atari office. His manager did what came to there during the day because the smell is so bad. Steve made some useful changes to the games that he worked on, but he was on looking for a new adventure.
He was very interested in the religions of the East, so he decided to go to India with his friend Daniel Kotka. They stayed in small Indian villages and met Hindu teachers, but Steve found that he learned more from ordinary Indian villagers than from the teachers. In the USA, people depended on facts to help them understand things. In these villages, people depended on their feelings instead. Steve learned to use both ways of thinking.
Okay. He was very interested in the region of the East, so they decided to go to India with his friend Daniel Coat. They stayed in the small India villages and meet Hindu teachers, but still found that they learned more from ordinary Indian villages from the teacher. In the USA, people depend on fact on the help when they understand things, and these villages, people depend on their feeling instinct. Steve learned to the use both ways of thinking.
After 7 months in India, Steve returned home, but he continued to find out about religion. He found a Zen teacher, Koban Chinu Otagawa, who helped him to choose a path for his life.
After 7 months in India, Steve returned home, but he continued to find out about religion. He found a Zen teacher, Kabon Chino Otogawa. He helped to the chose a path for his life.
Steve attended a few science classes at Stanford University. He also spent a lot of time working at an apple farm in Oregon that was owned by one of his friends from Reed. But this work was unpaid. Soon, he returned to his night job at Atari.
Steve attended a few science classes at Stanford University. He also spent a lot of time working at an apple farm in Oregon that was over by one of his friends from Reed. But this work was unpaid, so he returned to this night job at Atari.
Was now working at Hewlett Packard and had an apartment near the Atari office. While Steve was working, Woz used to come and play the new games in the office. Then, if Steve had a problem, Woz was there to help. Atari was pleased with Steve's work and gave him his own game to design. His boss said that he could earn extra money if he could design it with less than 50 microchips.
Wallace was now working on Hewlett Packard and had an apartment near a Atari office. While Steve was working, was used to come and play the new games in the office. And Steve had a problem. Was there to help. Atari was placed with the same work and have him his own game to design. His boss said on the call earn extra money in he could design it with less than 50 microchips.
Steve knew that he would need Woz's help for this. He offered him half the money, and they worked right through the night for 4 nights.
Steve knew that the world need was help for this. He offered him a half money on the worker rate for the night on 4 nights.
Finally, the game was finished, with only 45 microchips. Many years later, Woz was upset to find out that Steve kept much more than half the money for the game.
Finally, the game was finished at only 45 microchip, with only 45 microchip. Many years later, was upset to find on that Steve kept much more that had money for the game.
Woz then asked Steve to look at his latest creation, a small computer, keyboard and screen that could all sit together on a desk, a PC or personal computer. No one had made anything like it before, and Steve understood that it could be an important innovation. He suggested that they turned this personal computer into a business. Woz didn't want to leave his job at Hewlett Packard, and he wasn't terribly interested in making money, but he loved the idea of having a business with his best friend. The new company needed a name. Steve suggested Apple, after a visit to his friend's apple farm. He liked it because it didn't sound technological, and because
Yeah. Well, that asked Steve a lot for the latter creation a small computer keyboard and screen to call all sit together on desk. A PC or personal computer no one for meant anything like it before and Steve never understand that it could be an important innovation. He saw her that they turned this personal computer into business, but did want to leave this job at Hewlett Packard and he was terribly interested in marking money, but the love and the idea of having business was the best friend. The new company needed a name. Steve Sugar Apple after a vision to the life his friend Apple friend. We like it because I did something technological.
Apple came before Atari in the phone book. They
And
decided to
because Apple come before Atari in the phone
use
book.
that name if they couldn't think of anything better by the end of the day. They couldn't. So on April the 1st, 1976, Apple Computers was born.
Born. He lied because technological. They decided to use the name in the called thing of anything. We are at the end of the day. The call on April the first in 1966. Apple computer was born.
When Steve and Woz presented their ideas for a personal computer to the local computer club, one man was very interested. His name was Paul Terrell, and he owned a computer shop. Steve went to see him the next day and came back with an order for 50 computers. This was fantastic news, but there was a problem. The parts cost about $15,000. Steve and Woz had only $1,300.
Excelente.
They asked the bank for some money.
When Steve and Walt present their idea for a personal computer at the local computer club, one amount very interesting. His name was a Paul Trent, another computer shop. Steve went to see him the next day and came back to the order for 50 computers. This was fantastic news, but there was a problem. The part cost about $15 million. Steven was on $113.
But the bank didn't want to lend to these two young people. Steve offered his old workplace, Haltech, a share in Apple Computers in return for the parts. Haltech said no. Finally, a different shop agreed to give Steve and Woz the parts. They had 30 days before they had to pay for them.
They asked of the bank for some money, but bank didn't want lead to the two young people. Instead of offer his old workplace, holding a share in Apple Computers in return for the bird. Walker said no. Finally, a different shop agreed to give Steve and Walt the parts. They had 30 days before they had no pay for them.
Steve and Woz used the Jobs house and garage as a factory. Woz didn't have much time because
Stephen was using the job house and garage is a factory.
he was still working at Hewlett-Packard. But with some help from Daniel Kotka, his girlfriend Elizabeth, and Steve's sister Patty, the computers were built before the end of the 30 days. They had managed the impossible. The new product, Apple I, went on sale.
Well, did have much time because on the still working on the health market, but did some help from Daniel Cott, his girlfriend Elizabeth, and Steve's sister Patty. The computer were well before on the end of the 30 days. They that managed the impossible. The new product Apple One went on sale. Wow.
Now Steve and Woz had enough money to buy parts for 100 more Apple I computers. The business was going well. But Steve wanted to sell thousands of computers, not 100. He decided to take the Apple I to the Personal Computer Fair on the east coast of the USA. All the important people in the computer industry planned to be there. Some of them might take an interest in the Apple I.
Now Steve and was enough money to buy parts for 100 more Apple One computers. The business was going well, but Steve wanted to take thousands of computers, but not 100. Had decided to take the Apple One, the personal computer fair in the East Coast on the USA. All the import people in the computer into the planet to the there, so that they might take in the interest in the Apple.
At the fair, Apple was given a small table at the back of the hall. The Apple I was there in a wooden case, but few people came to see it. The trip was not a success. Steve walked around the hall sadly. He felt sure that they had the best computer at the fair, but he realized that it didn't look very interesting. He decided that they needed to sell a computer with its own screen and keyboard, and in an attractive case. They also needed a bigger space at the front of the hall. Woz was already working on a better computer, the Apple II. To make Woz's next computer a success, they were going to need a lot more money.
At the fair, Apple was giving a small tablet on the back of the hall. The Apple One was there in wooden case, but five people came to see it. A trip was a not still walking around this hall assembly. He felt sure that he had a best computer on the fair, but the release that did look very interesting. He decided that the need to sell computer was out screen, a keyboard, and the actual case. They also need a bigger space of the front of the hall. Was already working on the better computer, the Apple II. The big was next computer resources. They were going to need lot more money. Thank you, teacher, for asking for me, and thank you for watching. And in the next chapter 3. Bye.